Good morning. I'm Wendy Lewis, Executive Director of the McCune Foundation of New Mexico. And on behalf of the Foundation Board and staff, I'd like to welcome you to this webinar. And thank you very much for sharing some of your day with us. As you may know, last year the Foundation underwent a strategic planning process to more clearly articulate its priorities and help create more opportunities for alignment among its grantees and other funders. Our new plan builds on work the Foundation has been doing in New Mexico for the past 2 decades, but more formally articulates how we think about the challenges the state faces and where we see opportunities for more focused grant making. If you haven't had a chance to review the whole plan yet, I wanted to remind you that you can download it as a PDF on our website at www.nmmccune.org. The challenges and opportunities we face here in New Mexico are significant and pervasive, and we believe that deep intentional collaboration within the nonprofit sector is an approach that holds lots of potential for impact and progress on our biggest challenges. We see the plan and this meeting really as the beginning of a conversation with our grantees and the broader community, a conversation that will help us develop our grant program and find the best strategies to support the great work that's happening in the state. And I do really want to say that we view this as a conversation and really as a starting point. As a foundation, we're learning from the work that we've done on the strategic plan. And so we're here in a spirit of learning and respectfulness, and with the belief that answers to New Mexico's challenges really must come from communities and be informed by the people doing the work. So as much as we are here to inform you about our new plan, we are also here to learn, to listen, and to continually improve our work and our contribution to the great work being done by your organizations. And so for us, this was a new step, and you'll see from this cartoon that really we put a lot of thought into, well, what if this isn't a good idea, or what if we're not ready yet? But nonetheless, all of us are actually off on this journey now with a plan, and again in the spirit of learning and recognizing that if we need to, we'll make adjustments as we see how the plan fits on the ground. So first of all, I want to start with the Foundation's mission. The Foundation was established to memorialize Marshall L. and Perrine D. McCune, longtime residents of Santa Fe who fell in love with New Mexico. And really, I think the Foundation also began at Perrine's death. Assets were transferred to the Foundation, but Marshall and Perrine were philanthropists. They were quiet philanthropists in the state before the Foundation was set up. The Foundation grants only in New Mexico, and it does have a statewide mandate. The mission of the Foundation is pretty straightforward, and it hasn't changed. It reads, the Foundation is dedicated to enriching the health, education, environment, cultural, and spiritual life of New Mexicans. So this is obviously a very broad mandate, and since its inception in 1989, the staff and board have worked toward this goal. The specific frameworks for how grant decisions are made have evolved over time, but this mission has always and will be at the heart of our work. So what we'll do is go through the strategic plan. I'm going to walk you through the whole plan, and we're going to spend more time on the priorities, but I do want to go over the values and the first part of the plan. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is values. And our grant decisions are ultimately driven by the values of the Foundation, and these values are both for within our organization as well as part of how we interact with grantees and community members. And as part of our planning process, we've identified 6 key areas that inform how we evaluate organizations and how we operate as a foundation. And these include integrity, respect, and fairness, excellence, diversity, risk-taking and innovation, accountability, and community relevance. And if any of these are unclear or you'd like me to say more, you can ask questions through the chat box. The next slide is about strategies. And so while alignment of values is critically important for the organizations and programs we support, there are also a number of strategies that we are more formally adopting with our new plan, stating these explicitly to help us identify and support groups that favor these approaches. And these are going to look familiar to you. These are really things that we've been doing as a foundation. And these are operational, program, capital, and endowment support, support platform approaches, measured risk-taking, evaluation and outcomes, open and invitation-only application processes. And if there are any questions about these, we can answer those.
So one other question on the values came in, and the question was, how do we define diversity? And so diversity, from our perspective, is looking at the full spectrum of what makes people individuals in the state. So that includes everything from what their race, ethnicity, cultural background, age, gender, how they identify themselves. So we're very, very interested in programs that are really targeting a broad range of people and perspectives.
So another question, is the invitation-only application the same as discretionary funding? So those are actually two different things, and I'd like to hold off on that question, and we'll go to the next slide, and I think we'll take care of that question. So we've really reviewed right now the values and strategies that the foundation works from in making grant decisions. So we quickly want to review for you what we call tools. It's sort of like a toolbox that we have to actually do the work on the ground. And some of these tools are relevant to nonprofit organizations. Some are more relevant to consultants. And I wanted to also just, be transparent about how we do our work. I think that's very important. So I wanted to help the sector understand how we work and how groups can work with us more effectively. So the first is discretionary grants, and that's, someone asked a question about that. A discretionary grant is a small grant. The maximum amount that is available is $2,500, but it can range from anywhere from $500 to $2,500. And what we're doing is putting a link on our website. If your organization is interested in a discretionary grant, you can contact Jacqueline Gutierrez. There'll be information on our website about how to contact her, and you could provide a brief description of that, of your project, and then the staff will review that. Those grants are available throughout the year, and we have a very limited budget for that. I believe this year it's about $115,000 for the whole year. So, it's not a huge amount, but that's really to address very specific needs, not for large projects, but it could be a preliminary, project that might need additional funding later. So there often can be a link between a discretionary grant and a longer term, larger grant. Next is the standard grant cycle. I believe I've sort of mentioned what that is. That's really the open process by which we take applications. We take those applications in the year prior to funding. Next, hosting convenings and building partnerships. Consulting contracts. We do, as a foundation, often engage with consultants if we need expertise in a different area. Then, what we have as a staff. A good example of that right now is that we've engaged a consultant named Ernie Atencio to help us develop a framework and ultimately strategy for our grant making in the area of stewardship of natural resources. Next is promoting philanthropic resources. We have also used program-related investments. Currently, we're not taking on new program-related investments, but a good example of that is our investment in downtown Albuquerque. The foundation has worked on a project there to help revitalize downtown Albuquerque since 1999. And then last would be foundation initiatives. So if there are any questions about those, we do have a question about discretionary grants. Are discretionary grants more applicable to organizations offering basic needs services that address the foundation's mission rather than innovative risk-taking programs that are of a larger scale? I think discretionary grants apply to both. I do think we see them as a link between, say, short-term funding for a very specific small project, or, as a link to a larger project. I think we would give priority to organizations that are working in the area of the foundation's priorities. But certainly, I think we have a little more leeway with discretionary grants.
So we have a question about our foundation initiatives. What are the initiatives that we're working on? The initiatives can be very loose or somewhat more formal. So we have an initiative in the area of supporting or building capacity for the nonprofit sector. We recognized an opportunity to help create a communications firm that would help, that would target services to nonprofits. And so we've worked with a number of groups to help create Media Desk New Mexico, which is a communications firm that's targeting nonprofits. So that's one example. We also have work that's going on in the South Valley in Albuquerque that's been ongoing and has been put together by a number of nonprofits who are working together and trying to find ways to coordinate their work and build systems and that allow them to work more effectively together. And so we're doing work supporting them, and that's another example of a foundation initiative for us.
And I'd like to add, first of all, to thank Media Desk New Mexico, because Media Desk actually helped us set up this webinar. We don't have that expertise, so we actually engaged with them to do that. They also helped with filming the workshops that we did around the state, and then created a little video for our website of a compilation of those workshops. Also, I think in the future, I would recommend also that folks check back on our website, because one of the great things about, I would say, the foundation initiatives is that as we develop those, we will make those public, and that information will be available on our website over time. So it would be great for you to check back on that. Our goal really is to communicate with the nonprofit organizations in the community about what we are doing. And as we develop the priorities, we'll get into this. That information will also be on our website. The question is, are you funding capital projects? And the answer is yes. We have limited funds, I will say, for capital, and usually those projects are, higher dollar projects. And if you have an interest in that, my recommendation would be, again, to contact Jacqueline Gutierrez. She is helping to coordinate communication with staff about a larger project like that, by email. However, you can certainly apply, and if we have questions about the application, we'll follow up with you. We feel promoting philanthropic resources has a lot of different aspects to it, but I would say generally it is looking at how we can promote philanthropy in the state, for one thing, and that might be working with community foundations and other funders. I think it has a local meaning because we have funders here in the state, and we're looking at how we might partner with them to grow the resources in the state. And then I think it also means reaching out to national funders and understanding and communicating, understanding their priorities, but also communicating ours, so that we're able to leverage the dollars that McCune brings. I think in addition to what I'll say philanthropic dollars would also, we'd look at how do we also work with governmental resources as well. There can be partnerships there. We've done some of that and likely would continue to do that.
Another question, how does an organization get invited to convenings? We don't. The foundation doesn't have like a set calendar of convenings, and typically doesn't proactively pull together convenings. You know, our goal is really to support organizations who are interested in doing convenings themselves, and we can help with that, either with the use of our facilities or also just by maybe suggesting other people. But typically convenings are put together by the grantee community and supported by the foundation as opposed to the foundation initiating them in general. But in the future, if there are specific convenings that we would do, we would definitely make information about that available on our website.
There's a question about the environmental grants, which we're calling now Stewardship of Natural Resources. And yes, eventually the strategy that's developed for any of the priorities will be available for groups. So as we develop that, we'll be in communication so that the grantee community is aware of it. And that will likely be a process. And just to give you an idea, in this case with Stewardship of Natural Resources, a survey was sent out to grantees and to others in the community so that we could understand how the sector itself prioritized or looked at what were the most important issues facing New Mexico. So there'll be a process that we're going through to really learn what we can from a variety of sources on the ground first, and then a strategy will be developed over time about that. There'll also be work around the priorities that will be communicated over time on the website. So again, it's a good idea to check back on that. The average grant award right now is $15,000. We don't actually have an established minimum maximum, but I would say that for larger grants, again, it's a good idea to contact the foundation if you had in mind a larger grant, because those are things that we do need to have, I think, more in-depth information about. Also, you can apply for those grants, and if we have questions about it, we can follow up with a phone call. But in terms of a maximum amount, we are limited in terms of the dollars, but a lot of that really depends on the project itself, and also how closely aligned it is with the priorities of the foundation.
We have a question that basically asks, should current grantees bear in mind certain areas and strategies that we're moving away from and new areas and strategies that we are moving toward? You know, everything is articulated in the strategic plan. There's no radical departure from what we've been supporting in the past. This plan and this approach is really about looking at those in a different way, trying to be more opportunistic about what's happening, you know, in the world, in New Mexico, in the country at a given time, and to be able to take advantage of those things. So we used to have 6 program areas, which were things like social services, health, art, which are very general buckets, but now we've gone to 9 priorities. And if you look at the priorities, you'll find that they pretty much encompass all of the program areas that we used to think of, but they just do so in a way that's more focused and really allows for more opportunities for alignment among the grantees. Somebody asked if these slides are printable. I don't think they're printable through the webinar, but if you wanted to reach out by email, we could probably provide a PDF of them.
Okay, the question is about, is it possible to apply for one grant in the open cycle to fund 2 different projects? We are only able to fund one application, and I guess I would suggest that it's a good idea for a group to select one and apply only for one, because otherwise we're not able to prioritize that. We really prefer that groups prioritize their needs and then come to us with that one request. Operational funding can cover a wide variety of things, which does give an organization more flexibility, so I do want to reiterate that we do fund operating. There's a question about the timing of the work being done in Stewardship of Natural Resources, and no, we're just at the very beginning of developing that strategy, and so that information will not be available before the funding cycle. So again, as Henry mentioned, we're really approaching that based on how we funded in the past, and then as we understand how to develop the framework and the strategy, that will be communicated, and the sector will have time to respond before that becomes, you know, a further way of looking at the applications. This is another question. Is a proposal stronger if it involves a partnership with another nonprofit?
The answer is yes, but I think what we're really looking for are collaborations that are deeper than simply partnerships. So while it is compelling to see multiple nonprofits listed in a single application, it really has to make sense. Sometimes foundations can do more damage by requiring people or trying to encourage people to work together, even when it's not a natural fit. So what we really look at is what is the program, how is it structured, what roles do the organizations play, and is there leverage among them? And proposals that do all those things definitely, I think, are more compelling. So we're going to answer a few more questions at this point, and then we're going to move on to the foundation priorities. So we're going to answer about 3 more questions, and then we're going to go to the foundation priorities. There'll be a lot more time at the end of the presentation for more questions.
In terms of the application and the submission, really it's remained unchanged. There's a couple of changes. One will be that you'll identify the priority with which you're most closely aligned. There's also a way to identify other priorities that are intersecting with your work. As far as the submission itself, there's still grant narrative that is roughly, I think it's 650 words, and that will remain the same. The foundation still grants for projects that are within the state of New Mexico. We've not identified specific geographic regions right now. And at this point, there are no plans. I don't want to mislead you there, but it's still statewide funding. We do consider multi-year commitments for funding. The priority for the multi-year commitment would be with a group that is very closely aligned with the foundation's priorities. And I would suggest that multi-year funding, if that's of interest, again, to contact through the website preliminarily Jackie Gutierrez, you know, with that request, because those are usually longer-term projects, and we look at those as investments in groups that are doing work, again, that's closely aligned.
So last question for now, under which priority should a prospective grantee apply for operating funding? Would it be under capacity building, or would you apply under the priority which best aligns with the overall agency mission and work? So you should definitely apply under the priority that best aligns with the overall agency mission and work. Capacity building is not necessarily to build capacity for an individual organization. It's rather about projects that are looking to build capacity for the overall sector. But we do operating grants, and so if there's an organization that was applying for operating funds, simply do your application, list as a priority the priority that best aligns with your work, and just mention in the body that you're applying for operating funds. So now we're going to move on to the foundation priorities.
So now that we've talked about a lot of the priorities, kind of the mechanics of grant making, we'll move on to and discuss the foundation priorities. So in the past, as you probably know, we operated within 6 program areas, and these were very general in terms of the way that we operated. I also want to mention on the priorities, so here's my funny slide. You know, this is a risk for us, and we, you know, my feeling about this is, hey, what if this idea dooms our company? Well, then we can co-author a book about what went wrong. And I think it's important that we realize that it is, I think risk-taking is important. I think it's good to experiment. And in this case, we also learn from our mistakes. And I think that as a foundation, as we approached the strategic plan, that was the spirit in which we approached it. So the new priorities are more specific than the general buckets that we had. You know, the buckets were health, arts, education, and so on. And the priorities really are designed to be more opportunistic and to better take advantage of broader funding opportunities. So while we define these priorities in the plan, as we go forward, we likely are going to develop more specific strategies. We've already talked about that, and that those strategies will start to drive the grant making. And really, these are still under development, and I want to mention that. So it's really a transition that will take place over the next couple of years. And again, we'll be transparent and communicate as we develop that. And also, we'll be developing that with the grantee community's input. So a good place to check for information about that as we develop that will be our website. We'll likely do additional meetings as we develop that, so there's an opportunity for questions and answers. And we will also have on our website some discussion forums for our grantees. Those have not been developed yet, but those will be developed and likely will be organized by priority so that people will have a chance to communicate with one another about that, and also a way for us to receive feedback. So what we'd like to do now is just go through the priorities one at a time, and Henry will start with the first priority.
So, first thing is that these priorities are not necessarily in a specific order. So in other words, just because the first one is capacity building in the nonprofit sector doesn't mean that we necessarily think of that one as more important than the others. Also, it would be important to say that we do not specifically allocate certain percentages of our budget to one priority versus another. So it's not structured in that way where we've broken up our grant budget among the priorities. We accept all the applications and then evaluate them and look for alignment with the priorities and make decisions based on the alignment and opportunities for basically good work, supporting the best work we can. So the first one to talk about is capacity building in the nonprofit sector. Our approach with capacity building in the nonprofit sector, a lot of approaches are around trying to build basic capacity for groups. We're really looking at the opportunity to build expertise. So in areas such as communications, we talked about Media Desk New Mexico as a mechanism for building more expertise in communications focused on the nonprofit sector. We're also interested in building up expertise around finance, other operational aspects. So programs and projects that are focused on really creating expertise to support nonprofit work is what we're looking for in terms of capacity building. Are there any questions about that particular priority? Okay, so for the next priority we're going to talk about is economic development and family asset building. At the end of the day, with all the challenges that we have in the state, probably the most pervasive and basic problem we have is a very high level of poverty. So we're very interested in strategies and programs and organizations that are looking both at new approaches to enterprise development. How do we create more businesses in New Mexico that benefit more people? Typical models of bringing low-wage jobs in large numbers to New Mexico haven't really shown to make any real impact in terms of people's lives here, and so we're very interested in more innovative approaches. We're also interested in projects and programs that help families, particularly vulnerable families, build assets, whether that is a home or a bank account or resources to start a business. So I'm going to quickly go and answer a couple of questions that came in about the capacity building, and then we'll see if any questions come in about the economic development priority. So one question is the capacity building intended for individual org or as a service to nonprofits? We don't have a real clearly hard and fast vision of how that would look, but in general, as we think about capacity building, it would be programs that are really targeting nonprofits in general, as opposed to any specific one organization. And then the second question, which I think is pretty close, is capacity building for individual nonprofits or for organizations that support nonprofits. It could be either one. It all boils down to the program and how the program supports the sector and supports other nonprofits to make them more effective. Okay, and no questions have come in about the economic development priority, so we're going to move on to the next.
So the next priority is education transformation and early childhood development. So we feel with the, New Mexico, we are among the poorest performing schools in the nation, and New Mexico needs innovation in its education sector. So we've identified several areas specifically within education transformation. One is school leadership development. Another is supporting and scaling locally designed approaches, multilingual educational opportunities, and lastly, a more robust reform infrastructure as key leverage points in transforming education in the long term. And we also, as a foundation, recognize that there's a wide body of research that confirms that interventions in the first 4 to 5 years of a child's life present the most dramatic opportunity for influencing later success. So the foundation supports programs and organizations that advocate for policy reforms related to this, and provide direct interventions and building statewide investments in early childhood education and development. So related to education, is there a preference in this priority to impact policy, or will support be available for actual educational institutions that serve early childhood? And I see it as both. So in this case right now, we certainly recognize the importance of policy and how that might dictate what, how the sector can effectively address the issue. But right now, I would say that we're doing both.
I'm going to go back to a couple of questions that came in about economic development. Have you identified any specific benchmarks you wish to see via economic or rural development, or is that really open to a potential grantee to identify and propose? We really would love to see our grantees and the nonprofit community help develop those benchmarks. It would be easy enough for us to arbitrarily pick some benchmarks and ask people to target those, but as we said earlier, we really see these priorities as a process of really developing them further with the people that are doing the work, with the groups that are doing the work. And so I think the best outcome from our perspective would be that we would be able to work with a range of groups to identify and come up with what those benchmarks are, so that we can end up with data points that are useful to everybody. And then the other question was, would a business training course fit into your economic development priority? I think that it would really, again, depend on the implementation, on what the program looked like, who it was targeting, which populations, and so there would be a lot of questions. So it would definitely fit within the priority, but in terms of how aligned it is, in terms of the populations that we're looking to support, that would be the detail that we would have to see.
There are a couple of education questions. What do you mean by supporting and scaling locally designed approaches? So we feel strongly that the way to address education and how to solve those problems really resides within our communities. And we believe that the approaches that really come from a place of understanding New Mexican communities and populations and how that education can benefit those populations is very important. So I think a good example could be a school that has been established by a community that is an effective school and is addressing the educational needs of the population in an innovative way. that can then be taken and scaled to benefit additional communities. Henry may want to add something to that. I think a good example of that would be the work that's been done by the Center for School Leadership, and there are several schools now that have been developed. One of those schools is called ACE, and there's also a healthcare school and soon to be a technology school. So those, again, were developed locally. They have very high standards, and yet they can be scaled. Does the education transformation have to take place within a school setting, and does it have to correspond to early childhood development? So education and early childhood development, we're not prioritizing early childhood over other educational opportunities. So I want to make that clear. We see those as two distinct but related parts of the same priority. And then, does educational transformation have to take place within a school setting? And I would say no, it doesn't. There are a variety of ways in which that happens. I think leadership is something that is a great example of that, where we really, I think, have to look at it as a foundation at how could we start to support opportunities that really develop leadership that could lead to innovation and scaling, for example, within the state. We'll take one more education question, and then we'll start to go to the next priority. If there are additional questions we may not have time to answer here, we will follow up with the questions and likely put them into a frequently asked question category that will be available on our website. And I want to just thank people for asking great questions. I think this is a great discussion. So we will try to get to everything, but if we can't, we'll follow up with that. Would STEM training for teachers be a good fit, teaching teachers how to incorporate STEM across disciplines?
In general, as we talked about, school leadership is a priority for us. We are interested in programs that make our teachers better and support teachers. So generally, whether that's STEM or any other area, if it's about professional development for teachers, that fits within the priority area for us. And so we will make a note of all the other questions that came in around education, and but for now we're going to move forward with the next priority.
Leveraging opportunities in healthcare is the next priority, and we feel that the recent passage and ongoing implementation of the Affordable Care Act introduces meaningful changes to the healthcare environment nationwide. And because of New Mexico's socioeconomic circumstances, the people of the state are positioned to benefit significantly from some of these changes. So there are two key barriers to these opportunities. One is lack of education about the availability of the opportunities. And the second is lack of healthcare practitioners to meet the growing needs. To take advantage of this structural opportunity to improve the health of New Mexicans, the Foundation supports programs and groups seeking to mitigate these barriers. So we will look for questions related to this priority, and we will move on to the next priority in the meantime, and then follow up with any other questions.
The next priority is local food industry development. Previously, we've funded local food industry work in the past. Used to be under our environment program area, but we've broken it out as its own priority. As you know, there's a challenge in terms of finding opportunities for economic development in the state. There's actually, New Mexico has always been an agricultural state, and there's a huge opportunity. For example, the city of Albuquerque, the metropolitan area, consumes $120 million worth of fresh fruits and vegetables every year. But of that, only about 15% of that is actually grown within the state. So that's an example of a big economic opportunity that could be taken advantage of if we had the farming capacity to meet it. So we're interested in in programs that are looking at building capacity for agricultural programs. We're also interested in novel economic approaches to making food more accessible, good food and nutrition accessible to vulnerable communities. And of course, looking in particular for programs and organizations that are thinking in a broad way about how other organizations can plug into what they're doing. So partnerships and collaborations in the food industry development, local food industry development are definitely a priority.
So we have a couple of questions that came in regarding the healthcare priority. The first is, would providing services fit in this priority? And I would say yes, at this point, yes, it would fit under that. But again, applications that really address the barriers that we identified would be given priority. And then the second is, would you support initiatives that enhance access to care? And I would say yes, we would still support that because we believe that access to care is a key issue. And again, we're doing some work in the area of healthcare and looking at this. So as the strategy develops, that will be made available to the community, again, for all of the priorities. A question came in, does healthcare include mental health? And the answer is yes. So there's a couple of other questions. Do you agree that not qualifying for Affordable Care Act undocumented workers would be considered a barrier? And I would say yes.
So there's a question, are you interested in building public health infrastructure in New Mexico and in creating environments that allow for developing communities in which people can make healthy decisions? I think it's important to note that the challenges that we face in terms of healthcare in New Mexico are huge, huge, huge problems that are way beyond the scope of what we as a foundation can fix. And so in terms of the McCune Foundation playing a role in terms of actually providing, supporting broad provision of healthcare, it's not something we're able to do. So when we look at this priority, we are really, really interested in looking at strategic approaches that are trying to build out infrastructure in a way that can add benefits to as many people as possible. But I think it's important to really recognize that, the health care situation in New Mexico is a billion-dollar problem and challenge. And so in terms of how we're approaching it, it's really, that's why we really kind of framed our priority in a very specific way.
I do want to add to that, though, that I may be reading more into the question, but I do believe we see the intersection in regards to priorities. So, for example, if you think about stewardship of natural resources, which we'll talk about later, that's very broad, but it does include an understanding of how environments actually do intersect with the health of the citizens of New Mexico, and also within our own communities. And I think there's other intersections that have to do with civic engagement, which is an underlying theme of a lot of the priorities that really keys into how citizens advocate for the kinds of communities in which they want to live. So I do want to say this is a holistic approach, and that what we hope is that people will understand and see the leverage points within the priorities and how they fit together. I think food is another great example of that, where we're looking at nutrition, not only a local food system, but how that affects the health of the citizens of the state. So one other in the healthcare priority, would a project addressing the pros and cons of the Affordable Care Act for New Mexicans and offering policy suggestions to address the negatives of the ACA for New Mexicans qualify for funding? Yes.
And then a real quick question under the local food priority, does this include land acquisitions to support land trust models? I think that it would probably be in very rare specific situations where we would be able to do that. The key point is that, you know, our average grant size is about $15,000, and land acquisitions typically is kind of beyond the scale of what we typically support. So if there was a very, very specific piece of land that was created alignment and leverage with our other priorities, it would be something that might be considered, but it seems that it would be kind of a rare thing.
Right. I think, again, we're open to considering what that looks like and what the impact of it would be. But as Henry said, it's not going to be something we'd focus on in terms of huge land acquisitions. But if it's situated within a specific project that, again, leverages the other priorities, if that has to do with community values, with other issues, I guess, that intersect, we'd certainly consider it. The next priority is building links between arts and community engagement. So the arts have traditionally played a significant role in the culture and history of New Mexico and continue to contribute substantially to the state's economy and civic life. So we do value both of those, the economic as well as the civic aspect. And the foundation supports efforts to build and diversify audiences for arts and culture, particularly programs and organizations that seek to leverage arts, creative expression, and aesthetic experiences for the purpose of inspiring and driving higher levels of community and civic engagement. I also want to mention this is, again, a priority, as all of these are in development, that the state of New Mexico also recently released a cultural plan that will shortly be on our website. I shouldn't say shortly, but hopefully by the end of the year or early next year. And that's something that we are also taking a look at. So I would recommend that that's something that groups could also look at. I think there's some really interesting information there that we've yet to really identify in terms of the priorities and how that might develop our framework. But I also believe there's some very strong intersections with that plan and the foundation. That was a plan that the Department of Cultural Affairs worked with Bieber to release. So we're going to move on. Since questions haven't come in regarding this priority, I would like to move on to the next one, and then we'll come back to the other questions. So the next priority is stewardship of natural resources, which we touched on a little bit. As a primarily arid state and one in which meaningful portions of revenue are derived from outdoor and adventure tourism, New Mexico relies heavily upon its natural resources to support its economy and quality of life. Key natural resources, including water, air, wildlife, pristine landscapes, and well-managed rangeland, among others, should be protected, managed, and utilized in ways that support their viability in perpetuity. The Foundation supports organizations and initiatives focused on these objectives. So this obviously is a very broad priority. I've talked earlier about how we're going about developing this. It again really includes water quantity and quality, air quality, wildlife, conservation of land, and I will also include energy in this priority, and there are other priorities that also address energy conservation. So we haven't gotten any other questions about the arts priority or natural resources, so we'll move on to the next priority, and again, look for questions if they come in. So the next priority is influencing urban planning and the built environment. So for us, the built environment refers to the human-made surroundings that provide settings for human activity, and that could be anything ranging in scale from buildings and parks or green space to neighborhoods and cities, and that can often include their supporting infrastructure such as water supply or energy networks. The Foundation has made a meaningful investment, as I've mentioned before, in the development of the downtown Albuquerque area, and we continue to support the development of built environments across the state. The Foundation will continue to view such developments as critical, supporting strategies that encourage energy efficiency and that build civic engagement and support economic development. And I think a key for us here too is also looking at how groups and communities interact in order to advocate for meaningful enhancements to their communities. So for us, again, it's a community-based value, I think, approach here. And there's a question that came in, can townships apply for this area? And the answer is yes. The foundation, as a foundation, we can support 501c3 organizations as well as federally recognized Indian tribes and also governmental entities. So if it falls within those, we can also support organizations that aren't formally a 501c3, for example, as long as there is a charitable purpose, and groups of that nature can work under a fiscal sponsor. So there's a question about would this include actual transition to installing alternative energy platforms? I think I would need to make sure I'm understanding the question correctly. We are very interested in how we as a state are taking advantage of our resources, such as sun and solar. And I do believe the foundation would support projects that look at those, you know, how we could transition into those types of energy resources. So I think this is regarding stewardship of natural resources. Does this include initiatives that are addressing land use policy? And so I think I could see land use policy falling under a couple of different areas. Stewardship of natural resources is one, and certainly under influencing urban planning and built environment.
Yeah, I mean, it's particularly programs that work with communities to determine what the priorities should be in terms of land use and what's acceptable for communities. Those are definitely things that we would support.
Would environmental education programs, education transformation, would it go there under environmental, or would it go under the education priority, you know, there, or under stewardship of natural resources? I'm really glad this question came up and I didn't cover it. I think one of the key, I would say, longer term concerns that we have as a foundation is regarding environmental education and how do we develop leadership in that area. So I would say right now that would fall under stewardship of natural resources for now. If that changes, that would be communicated. But I do see that as very important for the state in the long term. So regarding the arts priority, does that include projects that utilize arts and culture as a mechanism for community building, engagement, and local leadership? And I would say absolutely yes. So I think we'll move on now to the next priority, and we'll address questions if they come in.
So the 9th priority that we've identified is supporting strategies for rural development. We continue to believe and feel that rural New Mexico is extremely important. The history of our state and our culture derives from the relationship between people and places. And rural New Mexico has lots of challenges, but we believe that it's important and needs to be supported. This rural development strategy is the area where we still have a lot of learning to do. As we've mentioned, we really do think of these priorities as collaborations with the grantee community, and the area of rural development is a place where in particular we'll be reaching out a lot over the next year to help understand what are the best strategies, what are the needs, and how can we be creative to use our resources to support rural communities. So that covers the priorities. So we'll now open this up for general Q&A.
So a couple of questions that came in are related to emergency and disaster relief. What priority would that fit under? And I think that it's possible that could go under a strategy for, it could go under the rural development. It could also fit potentially under the built environment, either one of those.
So a lot of it really depends on what the disaster funding would be for. You know, is it about trying to restore electricity? Is it about providing health services? So depending on the specifics of it and what the funding would be for would really shape which priority would fit under most appropriately.
Would a youth theater program that teaches young people to write and perform plays that focuses on peacemaking and nonviolent conflict resolution qualify as building links between arts and community? And I would say yes. A lot of it depends, again, on the approach and also the populations with which you're working, but in general, yes.
A couple of people have asked if it makes sense or if it's advisable to bridge or overlap multiple areas. So the short answer is yes. When you do fill out your application, you'll be asked to select a primary priority that you feel your program is best aligned with, but then there will be space to mention other priorities that you think the program also touches on. We really see these priorities as, you know, really, we don't think of them as individual silos, but we really think of them as comprising a web. And they are interrelated and they are interconnected. And really to make progress and to support the families that we want to support, we really think that there have to be multiple touches for them. So for example, to try to prioritize and expect a kid to do well in school, but then them not having good nutritional health, it compounds a problem. So yes, it makes sense to figure out how many of the priorities your program touches.
So another question came up about multi-year grants. Is there average funding for multi-year grants? And I would say that right now I don't have an average for multi-year grants. I don't know what that is, and so much of it really depends on the project itself and how closely aligned it is with the foundation's priorities. So again, I think that the most appropriate applications for multi-year really have to do with how closely aligned they are with the priorities, what the, I guess, the impacts that you're looking for, and also the populations that you're working with. If any organization has applied in the past and was declined, will McCune review that application with the org? We certainly are open to taking phone calls. We often receive phone calls, emails. There are a variety of ways that you can contact us about an application if it's denied.
Although, keep in mind that we get more than 700 applications for every cycle, and so we're not able to meet with every group individually that has been declined, but we'll do our best to try to provide some feedback. There's a question about what sort of post-grant evaluation do you require? In our application, we actually ask you to describe to us what sort of evaluation you are going to be using. So we don't have a specific approach in terms of evaluation at this point. We are looking at, in the future, trying to create something more standardized in terms of evaluation, something that could be more useful. But in the near term, the way that we prefer is to have the organizations in their application describe to us how they evaluate their program and then use that. A question, can you talk more about applying for operating fund grants? There's really not too much more to say. We fund operating grants just as we would fund anything else. And so if you or your organization are interested in an operating grant, you simply have to mention that in the body of your application. And it won't prejudice anything one way or the other.
A couple of questions came in about the application deadline and the how we do that. So the application dates for 2015 funding are September 15th through October 30th. Any time during that period, you need to log on to our website, and there will be a link specifically for an online application. We only take applications online, and there are clear instructions as well as an example of the application form that are available. Would you consider early childhood initiatives carried out in rural communities as addressing two priorities? I would say generally from yes. It might depend again on the application, but yes, I think that there's certainly overlap.
What we would look at for sure would be, is this an early childhood initiative that is the same that is being done in a city and it's now being applied to a rural area, or is it something that was really specifically designed for a rural area? That would feel like it was aligned with those two priorities more than simply taking something that was a generic initiative and trying to apply it in different places.
Would a project raising awareness about climate change by conducting a public arts program on species extinction come under arts or natural resources? I think it's both. I think a lot of it would depend on the organizations involved and what their primary mission is. Someone asked if we're open to having discussions with nonprofits prior to applying for funding to see if the program activities would fit. I would say that we currently meet with a wide range of potential applicants. However, Henry mentioned that we're limited in terms of how many people we are able to meet with. We're actually trying a new approach, and I'd like to tell you about it since you asked. Because we have limited staff and we are not able to effectively meet, really, we're not able to fulfill all of the requests for meetings that we get. We're trying a new approach, and that new approach involves meeting with organizations, multiple organizations at the same time. And we will put more information about this on our website so that you'll understand the specifics. But this would actually, I think, enable us to both meet with more potential applicants, and it would also be a way to facilitate conversations, with groups. So we're not organizing these meetings at all by priority. But we are trying it. It's an experiment, and we're really asking organizations to experiment along with us to see how this works. But the general format information will be available on the website, but it would involve a discussion of, first of all, your mission and some other sort of specifics. Each organization would have a certain amount of time to do that. Then there would be time for question and answer. Does this fit within your priority is a great example of a question that might come up. And then at the very end of the meeting, if an organization wanted or felt they needed further contact, there would be an opportunity roughly for about 10 minutes with Henry and me one-on-one for a more private conversation. So again, we try to address meetings with grantees as best we can, and we're starting to experiment about how we can do it. I do want to say also that we were really pleased that we got so much feedback from organizations at our meetings around the state that even coming together in one of those meetings was useful, not only for the information they received, but the opportunity to meet other organizations as well as grantees and others. So we're looking at ways of how we might be able to effectively do that while meeting with organizations.
And just a quick thing, somebody asked regarding the group meeting, would they be by priority? And the answer is no. We would probably not organize them by priority. We've had enough opportunities to sit around the table with the groups who are doing the same work with us. We think it would be very interesting to have an opportunity to sit around a table with groups that are doing work that might be unrelated, and it creates opportunities to find partnerships and opportunities to collaborate that they might not otherwise find.
Someone wanted us to clarify about the priorities. During the application process, there'll be two opportunities around identifying priorities. The first one is that you'll select the priority with which you're most aligned, your work is most aligned. And then there's a second opportunity to then identify other priorities that intersect with the primary priority.
question, where do social services, trauma crisis programs fit into McCune priorities? So we had previously had a program area called social services that all of these fit into. We don't have a priority that's focused specifically on social services now, but what we do is we think about, and I spoke earlier about the fact that we really see these different priorities as a web. We think of that web supporting families. So if you were to take a family that from a vulnerable community or that has challenges and put them in the center, and then look at what programs could be wrapped around that family to support them, that's one of the ways that we're thinking about social services. So the question would be really, look at how your program works. What are the functions of it? Does it use art? Does it involve using nature? Does it involve, is it based in an educational environment? Think of the priorities that way, and then place your social service program within that context. So we do continue to support these services and these programs, but we're trying to be more strategic about how we think about them and how they connect to our broader program.
You mentioned that you get 700 applications per cycle. Approximately how many do you fund each cycle? And I would say right now that is running around 220 to 240 grants, but a lot of it really depends on the applications that we receive and the amount that we as a foundation have to distribute annually. In the area of education transformation, will you support programs that help teachers and other educators understand bullying and preventing bullying for diverse student populations, including LGTB students and other diverse students in the education system? I think that falls under professional development. So yes, we would consider it. Does McCune Foundation want to be recognized publicly for projects funded? This question comes up a lot, and as a foundation, we feel strongly that the work being done in New Mexico really is a result of the nonprofits we fund. If you all feel that, if you think it's a benefit to you, you can. I would say that we don't have an expectation that we'll be recognized for that. And there are some guidelines. If you do recognize the foundation, that generally, if it is related to the amount of funding, we ask that you then would put us as anonymous, if we're identified by the amount funded. But if it is just a general, hey, this was funded by McCune, then yes, you can publicly do that if it's of benefit. Does McCune use a scoring system to evaluate applications? If so, is that publicly available? Right now, we do not use a quote scoring system that to evaluate the applications. Will the project description continue to be limited to 600 words? Yes.
Thank you all for all the very kind comments that you're mixing in here with the questions. Really appreciate it. Here's a question. If an organization is taking a holistic perspective that intersects youth development, education, asset development, agriculture, preservation of natural resources, and healthy opportunities for those vulnerable in our community, what main priority would apply? So that part of the challenge would be for the organization to make that call. Although it is, program could touch on multiple, even all the priorities, it's important for us that the organization make a decision about which they see as the primary.
Does it increase the odds of being awarded a grant to mention matching funds from other sources? I do think there's a section in the application regarding funding, and as a foundation, we do look at how, I guess we do look at funding for organizations. We feel it's important that there's diverse sources of funding. I do want to mention that we occasionally also support startups, which is a different kind of funding scenario, but we do like to have partners. I do think that is really great to talk about that in the application if you have matching funds. But I would say that the more important piece there would be how aligned the work is with the priorities. That's what we're looking at, and how is the organization working, you know, either to, if it's, let's say it's environmental education, how are you working with either age groups across time to intersect learning over a period of time? Are you working with other organizations? I think those are all things that I would say we are going to look at closely in addition to the matching funds. When would funds be made available? So our board for 2015, we take applications in the year prior to funding. So again, we're taking applications September 15th through October 30th, and then our board reviews the request for funding in February of 2015. So then once the decisions are made, grantees, well, all applicants are notified, and then funding would be available after the February meeting. But again, because of the volume that we deal with, it's usually by the end of February that people are notified, and then the funding is available after that.
Question, are applications reviewed by one panel, or are there separate review panels for the different priorities? There's only one panel, and so all of the applications are reviewed by the same panel. I will say that in areas where we come upon applications that mention information that we don't understand or that we don't have the technical expertise, we will often talk to outside experts to help us in our decision making. But in general, all of the decisions are made by the same panel.
Does the foundation ever offer to fund less than the requested amount, or is it funded all or nothing? We will fund less than the requested amount. How are funds allocated? Do we ask for an amount, or does McCune decide what level to give? Is there a maximum amount allowed? So in the application, you will be asked to specify the amount for which you're applying. I would recommend that you keep in mind right now the average grant award is $15,000, and we roughly have about $5 million to distribute. So again, the average right now is around 15. We don't have a maximum amount, but again, just keeping in mind that any larger scale grants that I'm going to say are, you know, a larger grant would be in the realm of $40,000 and above. That's again a larger amount for the foundation at this point. We've not established a maximum amount, but we're just very limited in terms of the amount that we have to give. Right now, the way applications are reviewed, we have a staff of 3 that reviews applications. That would be myself, Henry Rael, and Carlo Romero. So we all read all of the applications that we receive, sometimes more than once, and then we have a discussion about how closely aligned the groups are with the priorities, and then ultimately our board is the decision-making body regarding applications. So those applications are presented to our board at its February board meeting, and we have right now 8 board members.
There was one more question from a bit earlier, a question about capacity building. And the question was basically, will the McCune Foundation be hosting educational opportunities for nonprofits to give them more skills in bookkeeping or to understand legal concepts, things like that? That's not how we're thinking about that piece of the work. So there are organizations, including the United Way in Albuquerque, Santa Fe Community Foundation in Santa Fe, and other organizations that do provide those kinds of training, but the McCune Foundation isn't taking that approach. Another question, would partnerships to provide linkages to benefits for vulnerable populations be applicable? In general, yes, but the details are really where the decision-making would be made. So what does the partnership look like? Who are the organizations? How does the particular partnership allow each organization to be more effective than they would be otherwise? So in general, yes, but a lot of it would be in the details of how the program would be set up.
What will the grant reporting requirements be post-grant award? That varies depending on the amount of the grant awarded, and in general, there's a report that we ask for that outlines specific questions, including things related to the financing, how the grant money was spent, whether the project was completed or not, if it's general operating, some general questions about the organization. And I want to say that this is an area that we feel we can improve in, and we will be working on that. Nothing's changed yet about that, but as a foundation, we're really looking at reporting and how that becomes a feedback mechanism, more effective feedback mechanism for our work with organizations. If you all were to get 2 applications for a similar project, but one is focused more on underserved, marginalized communities and social justice aspects of the work, would there be a priority funding in this case? I would say that we certainly are, as a foundation, interested in grants that address the underserved, marginalized communities, and populations.
If the question is, if this is the exact same program, one targeting vulnerable populations, the other one targeting affluent kids, then the foundation would definitely prioritize. It's all about access and providing access to services to people that can't otherwise get it. So if there's a population that could get access to something some other way, it would probably be less prioritized than a population that wouldn't have access otherwise.
I think so much of that is also, it's really context. So we're doing our best to address that, but so much of it really depends on how projects are situated in communities and, how our populations brought together. I think something like that requires many, they're just, as Henry said earlier, I think that some of that is the devil's in the details in regards to how things are carried out, the spirit in which they're done, and so many other things that go into our thinking. Are interventions at the 3rd grade level, reading and math, within the purview of the education priority?
Generally, yes. But again, it's really about, is this a grant to support a reading and math intervention at a particular school, or is this to develop an intervention that can then be used by multiple schools? I'm not asking that specific question about the specific question, but that's the way that we sort of think about it. A program that's really looking, for example, if there was a program that trained parents how to do interventions so that the parents could then, build the capacity of school by being able to play a role or something like that. That would be more strategic than, a program at an individual elementary school in one particular part of the state. So the answer to the question is generally yes, but we're definitely looking for opportunities to be more strategic as opposed to focus on a particular intervention at a particular school.
We'll take maybe 5 more minutes to answer questions. It looks like it's really slowed down.
Another question in the food area, would community garden projects be considered? If so, how would you prioritize all the multitude of community garden projects? Wouldn't say that we wouldn't fund a community garden project, but it's a good question because we do get a lot of those requests, and there are a lot of community gardens, and we could not afford to fund them all. So what we would really look for is there a community garden project that that's connected somehow to connecting people to Medicaid, or that provides some other broader economic development aspect. So what it really boils down to is, how much alignment is there with other priorities, and that would really be what would help us determine funding or not.
is an educational intervention for training future teachers in teaching the arts viable? And I would say in general, yes. I think a lot of it depends on how that would be carried out and sort of the mechanism by which the training would take place. So again, there are details, but in general, certainly I think we recognize the value of arts and in the educational system and how that intersects. I think that continues to be a challenge in New Mexico as to how that gets funded and how to do that on a larger scale for impact. There's a question about when will the group meetings take place. So we're in the midst of scheduling them now, and we again have limited, time on the calendar. But Kathy Kozak in our office is the person who does the scheduling, and she has already identified, days in which Henry and I will be available to do those, and they're starting in October because our calendars are booked through the end of September. How do we make known that we are interested in the group meetings? And that would be that you could contact Kathy Kozak again in our office, and her email address is kathy@nmmccune.org. That would be a great way to contact her. We can also take requests by telephone. I think that we're at the end now of the webinar, and I would like to reiterate something Henry said. We've just gotten so many great comments from you about the webinar, and we are so appreciative of that. We've not made those available to the group, but we also want to thank you all for your time. We feel that we have incredible resources in the room, so to speak, in the virtual room, that really hold the answers, I think, to New Mexico's problems. And I'm really touched by the great questions and also about just the amazing community that we have, and we so appreciate your time and participation in the webinar. And we look forward to talking with you again and learning and understanding how the plan is working on the ground, and then making changes or staying the course depending on the feedback that we get and how it's looking to us. So thank you all very much for everything that you do.